arrival of His Royal Highness Prince Haji Al-Muhtadi Billah, Ibni His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Mu'azzaddin wa Dawlah, the Deputy Sultan.
مرحبا أهلا وسهلا بالأمير مرحبا بأسرة الأمير أسفار الشمس محياكم لنا فامتلأ الكون بنور وثناء مرحبا أهلا وسهلا بالأمير مرحبا بأسرة الأمير أسفار الشمس محياكم لنا فامتلأ الكون بنور وثناء أسفار الشمس محياكم لنا فامتلأ الكون بنور وثناء.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Good morning and welcome to the Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Memorial Lecture 2013. We begin with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, followed by the recitation of the Doa Selamat, led and read by Yang Berhormat Pihin Datuk Imam, Datuk Paduka Sri Setia Ustaz Haji Awang Abdul Hamid bin Bakal.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ila hadrati Nabi Mustafa Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa alihi wa azwajihi dhurriyyati ashabil kiram. Ila hadrati sayyidil anbiya wal mursalin alaihi wassalatu wassalam. Wa ila hadrati sayyidil awliya wa syuhada wa salihin. Ila hadrati walidina wa muallimina wa dhawil huquq alaina. إلى جميع المسلمين والمسلمات كافة عامة. لهم الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. لا إله إلا الله الحليم الكريم سبحان الله رب العرش العظيم فسيكفيكهم الله وهو السميع العليم فالله خير حافظا وهو أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك خير هذا اليوم فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه ونعوذ بك من شره وشر ما فيه وشر ما بعده إلى يوم الدين. اللهم الطف بعبدك عظمة السلطان kebawah dulu yang maha mulia Paduka Sri Baginda Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Muizzaddin wa Daulah Ibni Almarhum Sultan Haji Omar Ali Saifuddien Sa'dul Khairuddin Sultan dan yang di-Pertuan Negara Brunei Darussalam. Wafiqhu li salihil ummati wal bilad wa habbibhu ila ra'iyah wa habbibi ra'iyata ilaih. Allahumma arzuqhu farhatan wa sururan fid dunya wal akhirah. Allahumma ahfazhu fi nafsihi warham walidayhi wa ahfaz ahlahu wa awladahu wa ahfadahu wa ikhwatahu wa qarabatahu wa ra'iyatahu wal hadirin wal muslimin ajma'in. اللهم أدمه متمتعا بطول البقاء متوجا بتيجان الصحة والهناء. اللهم أطل عمره مصلحا للموظفين والرعية والبلاد وبلغ مقاصده لطريق الهدى والرشاد. اللهم اجعل سلطنته نجر بروني دار السلام معمورة بالتقدم والسلام والعدل والصلاح والبركة بين الأنام والرخاء والأمن والنصر وسائر بلاد الإسلام. اللهم وفق وسدد وأيد dulu yang teramat mulia Paduka Sri Pengadilan Muda Mahkota Pengadilan Muda Haji Al-Muhtadi Billah Ibni kebawahan dulu yang maha mulia Paduka Sri Baginda Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Muizzaddin wa Daulah Timbalan Sultan di salihil a'mal yantafi'un bil bilad wal ibad. Allahumma hab lahu umran tawilan madida wa 'aishan mazidan fi 'afiyatika wa ridak wa innaka waliyyu dhalik wal qadiru 'alayhi fid dunya wal akhirah. Allahumma inna nas'aluka an taj'al hadzal majlis Syarahan Memorial Sultan Omar Saifuddien tahun 2013 muhatan bil khairat wal masarrat wal anwar wal barakat mashmulan bi ri'ayatika madiyan 'indak waj'al ahlahu maqbulan ya khairal mas'ulin innaka 'ala kulli syai'in qadir wa bil ijabati jadir. Allahumma barik lana fihi wa barik lana fi biladina wa barik lana fi a'malina wa kulli ma an'amta 'alaina ya akramal akramin wa ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma absut 'alaina min barakatika wa rahmatik wa fadlika wa rizqik waj'alna min a'zami ibadika nasiban fi kulli khairin taqsimu fi hadzal yawm min nurin tahdi bih wa rahmatin tanshuruha wa rizqin tabsutuh wa dhurrin takshifu wa bala'in tarfa'uh wa fitnatin tasrifuha wa su'in tadfa'uh. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adzaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in bi fadli subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Taqabbalallahu minkum.
And now we would like to invite Yang Mulia Datuk Paduka Dr. Awang Haji Zulkarnain bin Haji Hanafi, Permanent Secretary Higher Education at the Ministry of Education and the Vice Chancellor of University Brunei Darussalam, as co-chairman of the Working Committee of the Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Memorial Lecture 2013, to convey his welcoming remarks.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Menghadap ke hadapan majlis Duli Yang Teramat Mulia Paduka Seri Pengira Muda Mahkota Pengira Muda Haji Al-Muhtadi Billah, Ibni Kebawah Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Pengira Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Muizzaddin Wad Daulah, Timbalan Sultan. Beribu ampun, hamba dili tuanku beserta seluruh jawatan kuasa kerja syarahan Memorial Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien 2013 dengan hormat dan takzim merafakkan sembah setinggi-tinggi menjunjung kasih atas kurnia perkenan duli tuanku berangkat bercemar duli ke Majlis Syarahan Memorial Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien 2013 pada pagi ini. Keberangkatan duli tuanku ke Majlis Syarahan Memorial Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien 2013 bukan saja menyerikan majlis, malah menunjukkan betapa duli tuanku mengambil berat tentang isu-isu global yang mempengaruhi pembangunan negara dan primustahaknya pencarian dan penjanaan ilmu dan pemupukan budaya pembelajaran sepanjang hayat. Beribu ampun, hamba duli tuanku dengan penuh hormat dan takzim memohon perkenan duli tuanku bagi hamba duli tuanku meneruskan sembah alu-aluan pada pagi ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, this year's lecture marks the third memorial lecture jointly organized by the Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Foundation and University Brunei Darussalam under the Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Memorial Lecture Series. We are very honored that His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, is going to deliver a talk entitled How Did Korea Grow So Fast? Lessons for Developing Economies. Often described as the miracle on the Han River and being one of the few countries that successfully transformed itself from a recipient country status to a donor country, its economic transformation has been held up as a model for other countries to look into. At the end of the Korean War in 1953, the country was completely devastated, and with very little natural resources, its future seemed bleak. Its meteoric rise can be traced from the 1960s, when the industries were still largely enhancing existing technologies. Today, the Republic of Korea is a high-tech, innovation-driven economy, and its industries are global leaders from semiconductors and mobile phones to shipbuilding and automobiles. Having cemented itself as one of the world's 15 largest economies in about 5 decades, we want to learn more about what fueled Korea's economic prosperity. His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo has a distinguished political and diplomatic career spanning over 30 years. He served as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Industry and Trade, and in 2008 until 2009 as Prime Minister. He was also a Special Envoy on Climate Change for the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. In this respect, His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo has played a leading role in overseeing and establishing the framework for economic and financial growth and development of his country. Korea's transition from poverty to riches is an inspirational story of the determination, perseverance, and endurance of the Korean people in nation building. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, Known as the architect of modern Brunei, Almarhum Sultan Haji Omar Ali Saifuddien Sa'dul Khairiwaddin modernized our system of government, education, and social welfare. The Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Memorial Lecture is an event to remember Almarhum's contribution to Brunei Darussalam's development by bringing in prominent personalities and intellectuals who are renowned specialists from around the world to deliver a lecture that touches upon development. Almarhum started his program of socio-economic improvements for Brunei Darussalam by launching the first 5-year National Development Plan in 1953. The 10th National Development Plan was launched last year by His Royal Highness Paduka Seri Pengiran Muda Mahkota, Pengiran Muda Haji Al-Muhtadi Billah, with the theme Knowledge and Innovation, Enhancing Productivity, Expediting Economic Growth. For the next 5 years, this National Development Plan aims to expedite national economic growth by investing in highly knowledgeable, skilled, creative, and innovative workforce, both in the public and private sectors. Funds for research and development have also been further allocated to spur possible commercial ventures. Brunei's small and relatively young population is provided with free education and healthcare. Alhamdulillah, we are also ideally located and enjoy political stability and peace, and our oil and gas industries have enabled our population to live relatively comfortable lives. All these factors have resulted in positive social indicators such as high literacy rates and longer life expectancy. With these advantages, our goal is to shorten our learning curve to further propel our economic growth. The future is about knowledge and innovation. The future is about collaboration and synergy. His Excellency Dr. Han's talk will provide us some reflection of the Korean journey. Beribu ampun. Sebelum mengakhiri sembah alu-aluan ini, hamba Duli Tuanku menjunjung kurnia perkenan Duli Tuanku untuk menyembahkan setinggi-tinggi menjunjung kasih di atas keberangkatan Yang Teramat Mulia Paduka Seri Duli Pengiran Muda Abdul Malik, Yang Teramat Mulia Paduka Seri Pengiran Anak Puteri Haja Masna, dan juga di atas keberangkatan Yang Amat Mulia Pengiran-Pengiran Kshatriya, kehadiran Yang Berhormat Menteri-Menteri Kabinet, ahli-ahli Majlis Mesyuarat Negara, serta div-div yang dihormati sekalian. Hamba Duli Tuanku menjunjung berbanyak-banyak ampun bagi sebarang susun sembah dan suruk langkah yang tiada majlis dalam Majlis Syarahan Memorial Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien 2013 pada pagi ini. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hamba Duli Tuanku menjunjung anugerah.
We now invite Yang Mulia Associate Professor Dr. Azman bin Ahmad, Assistant Vice Chancellor of University Brunei Darussalam, to introduce our lecturer in this morning's ceremony.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Menghadap ke hadapan Majlis Duli Yang Teramat Mulia Paduka Seri Pengiran Muda Mahkota, Pengiran Muda Dr. Haji Al-Muhtadi Billah, Ibni Kebah Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Baginda Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Mu'izzuddin wa Daulah Timbalan Sultan. Beribu ampun. Hamba Duli Tuanku dengan penuh hormat dan takzim memohon perkenan Duli Tuanku bagi hamba Duli Tuanku meneruskan majlis pada pagi ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, On behalf of the Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Foundation, in collaboration with University Brunei Darussalam, I would like to welcome everyone to the third SOAS Memorial Lecture. We are indeed very honored and privileged to have a distinguished international speaker, His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo, to deliver the SOAS Memorial Lecture. His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo's lecture is entitled, "How Did Korea Grow So Fast? Lessons for Developing Economies," a topic that is interesting and a very timely one, as Brunei Darussalam is undergoing a journey that will transform the nation and prepare itself for the future. We will listen to Dr. Han's thoughts on the topic, and at the end of His Excellency's lecture, we would like to open the session and give the opportunity for the audience to interact with Dr. Han with questions or comments, subject to time availability. Before I invite His Excellency, please allow me to introduce our speaker today. His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo served as Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea from 2008 to 2009. Prior to that, he held several political and administrative posts, including Korea's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2001 to 2002, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance from 1996 to 1997, Chief of Staff to the President from 1994 to 1995, and Minister of Trade and Industry from 1988 to 1990. His Excellency Dr. Han also has a distinguished diplomatic career as Korean Ambassador to the United States from 1993 to 1994. Also as President of the 56th session of the United Nations General Assembly in 2001 to 2002, Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General on Climate Change from 2007 to 2008, Chair of the 2009 OECD Ministerial Council meeting, and member of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability in 2010 to 2012. Currently, His Excellency Dr. Han is member of the United Nations Secretary General's Advisory Board on Water and Sanitation and founding chair of high-level experts and leaders panel on water and disasters. Prior to his entry into politics in 1988, His Excellency Dr. Han had a long and distinguished academic career. He was Professor of Economics at Seoul National University from 1970 to 1988. He taught economics at the University of York in the UK from 1965 to 1968, and at the Department of Applied Economics and Emmanuel College at the University of Cambridge from 1968 to 1970. He was also a senior Fulbright scholar at the Department of Economics, Harvard University from 1985 to 1986, and a visiting professor at the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences, University of Tokyo from 1986 to 1987. His Excellency Dr. Han received his bachelor's degree from Yonsei University, master's degree from Seoul National University, and his doctorate in economics from the University of York in the UK. His Excellency has received honorary degrees from several universities, including the University of York, Gangwon National University, Yonsei University, and KAIST. He has many publications, both in Korean and English, the latest of which is entitled Beyond the Shadow of 9/11, a year at the United Nations General Assembly, published in 2007. His Excellency received, among many domestic and foreign decorations and awards, Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the United Nations in 2001, and was awarded an honorary knighthood from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom in 2004. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo.
His Royal Highness Prince Haji Al-Muhtadi Billah, Deputy Sultan His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Malik, Chairman of the Board of Governors of the His Majesty's Foundation, Her Royal Highness Princess Haja Masna, Pengiran, Chetrias, Cabinet Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, Chairman Lee Jung-gun of Buyong Group, and some guests from Korea, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased and honored to be invited to speak to you at this important public lecture in memory of Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Sadul Khairi Wajian. The late Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Sadul Khairi Wajian was a great man, the architect of modern Brunei, who devoted his life to restore the monarchic dignity of Brunei and worked tirelessly for the peace, security, and well-being of the Brunei people. In the unsettling and rapidly decolonizing early years of the United Nations after the Second World War, he was pivotal through diplomatic ingenuity and patriotic persuasion in safeguarding the independence of this nation at a time when the international and regional political situations were changing, not necessarily to the advantage of this small country, Brunei. It is indeed a great personal honor for me to be invited to speak at this commemorative lecture, as I also come from a country that has gone through a similar stage of international and regional politics and the political and economic difficulties. I would like to express my sincere appreciation, particularly to His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Malik, Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Yayasan Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah, for his kind invitation. I am also most grateful to His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah for the kindest support to invite me to this memorial lecture today. I remember with fondest memory my last visit to Brunei in November 2001, when as Korea's foreign minister, I took part in the ASEAN Plus 3 summit meeting here in Brunei. All of us attending the ASEAN Plus 3 at the time were very much impressed by the efficient organization of the meeting, but above all, greatly appreciated the kindness and hospitality of the people in and out of the conference room at the time. The country I visited then for the first time was very clean and beautiful. After 20 years later, Brunei is even cleaner and more beautiful, more peaceful and prosperous and better known to the world. Since then, Brunei has been very active in expanding its global and regional outreach. The recent ASEAN Plus 3 summit and the East Asia Summit, which President Park Geun-hye of the Republic of Korea attended, and Brunei hosted so successfully a little more than 2 weeks ago, succinctly testify to an increasing role that Brunei has been playing in the international and regional affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, in the summer of 1963, 50 years ago, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien Sadul Khairi Wajian went to London at the invitation of the British government. It was in London at that time that the Sultan took the major but very difficult decision to stay out of Malaysia, defining the destiny of this nation. It was a very crucial decision, but on reflection, a very correct and rightful one for the future of Brunei and its people. In that same summer, 50 years ago, I also arrived in London to pursue my postgraduate studies in Great Britain. At the time, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. Its per capita income was less than $100. Because of the shortage of foreign exchange reserves, Koreans were permitted to leave the country with no more than $100. When I arrived in Great Britain in the summer of 1963, I had $90, about 30 pounds at the going exchange rate in my pocket. When I went in to live in a dig introduced by the University Accommodation Office, my landlady, Mrs. Forth, seeing me for the first time, seemed to be somewhat puzzled. When I asked why she was so at a loss seeing me, her reply was, "Why aren't you black?" When asked why I should be black, her reply was, "Aren't you from Africa?" She thought Korea was located somewhere in Africa. Such was the knowledge of the working men and women of Great Britain about Korea 50 years ago. At the time, Korea's image in Great Britain and in the world was country, nothing but of war, poverty, endemic diseases, coup d'etat, dictatorship, street demonstration, police brutality, human rights violation, orphans, and the likes. At the time, we as a nation had much catching up to do in order to make Korea an economically prosperous, politically free democratic, socially inclusive, and culturally vibrant country. But as we had no natural resources, we had to create something out of nothing. In April 2002, 11 years ago, I visited Ghana on my way to Sierra Leone, where in my capacity as President of the United Nations General Assembly, I went to inspect the UN peacekeeping operations there. At that time, I had a summit meeting with the President of Ghana, President John Kofi Agyekum Kufur, in his palace in Accra, and then had a joint press conference. President Kufur had invited me to Ghana the year before when both of us attended the Nobel Peace Prize banquet dinner in Oslo in December 2001. As I was introduced, I received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the United Nations in Oslo on December 10, 2001. President Kufur was also invited to a ceremony as one of his countrymen, Mr. Kofi Annan, then the Secretary General of the United Nations, also received the Nobel Peace Prize with me on his own behalf. At the press conference, President Kufur openly asked, how was it that when Ghana gained independence in 1957, Ghana's per capita income was $300, 3 times more than that of Korea. But while its per capita income still remained 300, in 2002, per capita income of Korea reached $10,000. He'd like to know the secret of Korea's economic success. In June this year, 11 years later, I once again visited Ghana to attend an international conference. A decade later, from my first visit there, Ghana's per capita income was still around $1,500, while Korea's per capita income, adjusted by purchasing power parity, reached $30,000 in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, Korea has now become the 12th largest economy with a GDP of $1.1 trillion and 8th largest trading nation with a total trade of $1.07 trillion in 2012. Its foreign reserve stands at about $300 billion. Korea is now aid donor, the only developing country that moved from the recipient of the official aid to the 24th member of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, the donor committee of the developed nations, in 2010. When Korea was very poor, the OECD, the so-called Club of Rich Nations, was our dream. In 1996, 33 years from the day I set my foot in London, Korea was finally admitted to the OECD. Personally, it was a very moving moment because in my capacity as Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, I was the chief principal minister in charge of successful negotiations for accession to the OECD. You can imagine the great sense of achievement that I personally entertained at the time. When I was Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea later, I served as a chair of the 2009 OECD Ministerial Council meeting, where I was able to garner the unanimous support of the participating ministers to pass a resolution on the Declaration of Green Growth, new paradigm of growth, to promote quality-oriented low-carbon green growth. The paradigm I would describe more in detail later in my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, Korea and the Koreans were often misunderstood in the past. Sometimes they were oversold, but oftentimes they were undersold. However, it is true that Korea has now become more widely known, for good or bad, all over the world than when I was growing up. With the advancement of democracy and human rights, the rapid development of national economy, the increase of middle class, the Seoul Summer Olympic Games of 1988, and the World Cup of 2002, where His Royal Highness Crown Prince also attended the opening ceremony, Korea's forthcoming Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games of 2018, APEC Summit meeting in 2005, G20 Summit meeting in 2010, Nuclear Security Summit in 2012, UN High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness last year, and World Energy Congress a few weeks ago in Korea. Korea is totally different country compared with 50 years ago or even 30 years ago. Korea is now a global leader in several manufacturing sectors. Korea is the world's leader in DRAM memory chips with 65.7% of the global market share. In LCD displays with 51% of global market share. In mobile phone market share, and in shipbuilding, in automobile, in refinery capacity, and even in steel production. Korea is one of the leading countries owning a large number of intellectual property rights after the US, Japan, Germany, and China, with 11,848 international patents applied in 2012. Korea ranks the highest on the government broadband index, has the highest smart penetration rate with 58% of Koreans owning smartphones last year. Korea is now the home of many Olympic medals and the Lady Golf Championship. Koreans constructed the tallest buildings in the world, Petronas in Kuala Lumpur in 1996 and Burj Khalifa in Dubai in 2010. K-pop such as Gangnam Style and Korean drama Waves Hallyu are sweeping Asia and the world. Korean artists such as video artists like Baek Nam-jun, large number of talented classical musicians, sports people such as footballer Park Ju-sung, figure skater Kim Yuna, golfers like Park In-bi, and with Korea's London Olympic team in 2012, winning 28 medals, ranking the 5th in the 2012 Olympic chart, Korea is becoming a name of country well known throughout the world. In the area of international peace, development, human rights, and eradication of global poverty and endemic diseases, heads of two most important international organizations, the United Nations and the World Bank, were born in Korea. Ban Ki-moon, who was my chief of staff, by the way, at the United Nations, is now UN's Secretary General, and Kim Yong-kim, the president of the World Bank, was born in Korea. He's an American, but Korean American. Thus, Korea indeed has changed and changed very rapidly during the last half century. Today, I would like to concentrate only on the economic success story, what the secret are, and how Korea can offer the lessons to other developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world in 1962 when we embarked on the first 5-year economic development plan. However, it is amazing to note that Brunei had a long-term development plan ahead of most of developing countries in 1950s. Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien's benevolent concern to his people resulted in the formulation of the first 5-year development plan for the years 1953 through to 1958. It was a decade before Korea ever conceived of formulating a similar long-term plan. His Royal Highnesses had such an insight and vision, and he has been an inspiration to all other developing countries even then. If I were to enumerate the most momentous events in the economic history of Korea since the 1960s, I would say that first, President Park Chung-hee's visionary and clean leadership and the formulation of the Economic Development Plan in 1962. Secondly, Nixon Doctrine and the initiation of heavy and chemical industry development in the early 1970s. 3, oil crisis and economic stabilization policy in the early 1980s. 4, Asian financial crisis and the globalization of Korean economy. I would like to explain these events more in detail. Korea's first and second five-year plan, 1962-1971, embraced, it was initiated by President Park Chung-hee, by the way, embraced the economy first principle, emphasizing on the development of light industries, export-oriented development, investment in infrastructure, and the development of key industries such as fertilizer, cement, and steel industries. At the time, Korea's financial resources, both domestic and foreign, were very much limited. In order to mobilize for resources for domestic economic development, National Tax Service was established in 1966. And also in order to encourage the inflow of foreign resources, Bank of Korea provided repayment guarantee for foreign loans, very unusual practice. Korea was endowed with few natural resources, but had a large, efficient, and diligent labor force. Therefore, Korea's export-oriented industrialization was initially focused on the labor-intensive light industries. As a consequence of export promotion policy, the export increased by 20 times within 10 years between 1961 and 1970. The per capita income of $82 US dollars in 1961 increased to $253 by 1970. The average annual growth rate was 8.8%, more than the target rate of 7.1%. It was for this reason of unexpectedly high growth that the term miracle on the Han River was coined. In July 1969, the Nixon Doctrine was declared and the Bretton Woods system collapsed in August 1971. Korean government realized that heavy reliance only on light industry would neither sustain Korea's rapid economic transformation nor prepare Korea for self-defense system, as the Nixon Doctrine implied the American disengagement from the Korean Peninsula. Korea had to defend itself and therefore needed to have its own defense industry. The Korean government had to change the emphasis from the light manufacturing to the heavy industry. The Heavy and Chemical Industry Promotion Plan was announced, therefore, in May 1973. The heavy and chemical industry promotion concentrated on steel, petrochemicals, shipbuilding, machinery, electronics, non-ferrous metals industries. With the political instability caused by the assassination of President Park Chung-hee in 1979, the macroeconomic imbalance due to heavy industry overinvestment and the second oil crisis, Korea needed to drastically stabilize the national economy. The major economic problems that Korea faced in the late 1970s and early 80s were chronic inflation, imbalance of current account, large foreign debt, and investment distortion. It was a major crisis, both political and economic, that Korea faced for the first time in almost 2 decades. Korean economy needed a fresh start with new policy. Economic growth could not be sustained without controlling inflation. To remedy the situation, Korean government announced the economic stabilization policy in 1980 and even introduced a zero-based budget for 1982. This was a very drastic and dramatic economic policy of Korea at the time. No other major countries in the world have ever implemented the zero-based budget before or since then. The successful implementation of this economic stabilization policy in the 1980s enabled Korea to prepare for another major economic takeoff in the middle of the 1980s. External factors also contributed to the success of Korea's economic development during the 1980s. The so-called three lows, low oil prices, low exchange rate, and low interest rate helped Korea restore its competitive edge once again. In July 1993, Korea announced new economic five-year plan to liberalize the financial market. By December 1995, Korea's per capita income exceeded $10 billion, $10,000, I'm sorry. And Korea was admitted, as I said, to the OECD in December 1966. Then the international financial crisis of 1997 struck Korea. The Asia's financial crisis that began in Thailand reached Korea in the second half of 1997, and the Korean government had to agree with the IMF for the financial rescue package of $57.6 billion. However, Korea was able to pay them back in August 2001, 3 years ahead of schedule. At the time, our approach to deal with the international financial crisis was to further open and more liberalize the capital market. As opposed to the then open market approach a la Korea, Malaysia at the time adopted a different, opposite approach by closing the domestic financial market to the outside world. However, both countries succeeded in overcoming the Asian financial crisis in due course, and it has now been left to the economic researchers to find out why and how both policies, diametrically opposed policies, could succeed in both countries. Thus, Korea was able to overcome the Asian financial crisis within a few years, and Korean economy was put on a normal growth trajectory. However, as you may know, the collapse of the Lehman Brothers 10 years later, in September 2008, brought about the international financial crisis of historical magnitude, and we had to deal with it. At the time, I had already been called back to serve as Prime Minister, and the management of the national economy was one of my immediate responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you would allow me if I were to diverge a little bit at this juncture and speak on how the leaders' experiences interact with the nation's economic realities to produce new strategies and policies. I would like to relate my own international political experiences in strategizing Korea's new economic policy paradigm. As some of you may know, I am an economist by profession and had long been professor of economics at Seoul National University before I entered politics in 1988. I was elected member of the National Assembly in my constituency, city of Chuncheon in Gangwon Province, the most mountainous province in Korea, where my family lived since the 15th century. However, I left politics in 2004, after 16 years later voluntarily, at the time when my popularity in my district was overwhelmingly high and I could have been easily elected for further terms. The year 1988 marked the 16th year marked my 16th year, that is 2004. Had I run for the National Assembly in that year, my political career would have spanned 20 years, which would have been 2 years longer than I worked as professor of economics at Seoul National University. At the time of entering politics in 1988, I had promised to myself that I would not stay in politics longer than I spent in academia. Not wishing to renege on my own promise to myself, I left politics without any lingering attachment to it. Interestingly enough, by doing as such, I was actually following Korea's long tradition of scholar statesmanship. During 518 years of Korea's last kingdom, Yi Dynasty, all the high-ranking officials were excellent scholars and poets. The high-level public servant examination required them to compose poems and answer questions from the Chinese classics such as Analects of the Confucius, works of Mencius, Doctrine of the Mean, and so on. This long-held scholastic tradition of high bureaucracy in Korea is markedly different from Japan, where samurai, warriors, rather than literati, assumed the major role in government. Promptly after my departure from domestic politics, I was invited by the Secretary General of the United Nations to serve as one of his special envoys on climate change. The others were Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Prime Minister of Norway, and Ricardo Lagos, former President of Chile. As the special envoy, I traveled widely to solicit the support of the world leaders. Through these trips, I found out that the world leaders were clear about the need for us to work together to adapt to the effects of climate change and to assist those who are least able to do so. I heard many speak of their national actions and strategies, dispelling myths about inaction. At the same time, virtually everyone said or implied that current level of effort globally was not commensurate with the challenges of stabilizing concentration of greenhouse gases at a safe level. In sharing views about how to address the situation, I was impressed by the continuing support that leaders shared for the principles of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which have proved robust and durable over the years. In particular, I noted a clear emphasis on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and the recognition of the special circumstances of developing countries. Thus, at home and abroad, I witnessed a growing consensus to abandon the conventional economic approach of grow first, clean up later. A new and fresh approach was needed in its place, one that would enable economic growth, prevent environmental degradation, and enhance climatic sustainability. What was desperately required at this stage was clear and unrelenting leadership to translate these desires into practical policy action that could bring about this change in reality. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, while I was spending my happy and leisurely post-political life thus concentrating on international public activities, the newly elected President of Korea invited me to join his government as Prime Minister in January 2008. When that call came, I had some idea, with 20 years of experience in domestic and international public service, of how to assist the President in changing Korea's traditional development paradigm to move ahead. Such a change was necessary if the new administration was to achieve the goal of transforming Korea into truly global Korea, truly responsible member of the international community that would contribute towards addressing global as well as domestic issues and challenges. It was against this backdrop that President Lee Myung-bak, when he attended the G8 Summit Outreach Meeting on Climate Change in Dohyaku in Japan in July 2008, made a public announcement that Korea, A, will become an early mover in tackling the global challenge of climate change, B, would play a bridging role between developed and developing countries, C, would do its best to refine the Kyoto Protocol's market-based mechanism to encourage the non-Annex I countries of the Kyoto Protocol to join forces to reduce carbon emissions voluntarily, and 4, would establish the established East Asia Climate Partnership with an initial endowment of $200 million as a venue for more intensive deliberation for the major carbon emitters in the region, that is China, India, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, and some other ASEAN countries. 1 month after the G8 Outreach Summit, Korea proclaimed on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of Korea on August 15, 2008, that low-carbon green growth would be Korea's new national vision. This vision aimed at shifting current national development paradigm from the quantity-oriented and fossil fuel-dependent development to a quality-oriented sustainable growth model. Unlike in the traditional quantity-oriented growth model, where labor and capital are the major factors of production, the most important factors under the new quality-oriented growth paradigm would be new ideas, transformational innovations, and the state-of-the-art technology. Through the new paradigm of low-carbon green growth, Korea aimed to catch 3 birds with 1 stone. 1, creating new engines of high growth. 2, ensuring climatic and environmental sustainability. 3, contributing more to the process of international negotiations to fight against global warming and climate change. Unfortunately, when we were preparing to put this new national vision into policy action, Lehman Brothers collapsed on September 15, 2008, producing devastating global financial repercussions. I had to grapple with the ripple effects of the so-called once-in-a-century credit tsunami. Consumer confidence remained very low while anxiety levels continued to soar. The pervasiveness of exotic instruments and various toxic assets in our capital market meant that any remedy was rendered deficient at best. At the time of Lehman Brothers' downfall, global stagnation that followed immediately, the road ahead seemed to be long and arduous, and the success was contingent on all stakeholders doing their parts. By this time, it was an incontrovertible fact that the principal global challenge that Korea faced were twofold: global financial crisis and climate change. In order to put the new national vision of low-carbon green growth into policy action and at the same time to address the devastating financial crisis, we began to work out various measures. On January 6th of 2009, I, as a Prime Minister, announced the Green New Deal policy. Beyond creating the enabling conditions for green growth, it also sought, through New Deal component, to stimulate jobs and restore growth. In economic technical terms, the policy was an amalgam of a long-term policy of expanding growth potentiality through innovation and short-term policy of creating jobs and revitalizing national economy through fiscal stimulus. The policy aimed at facilitating the transition towards a green growth while stimulating jobs. As a combination of neoclassical supply-side economic policy with the Keynesian demand-oriented policy prescriptions, the New Deal portion of the policy was designed to phase out as the national economy recovered, leaving only green growth as a major economic goal to deal with. The Korea's Green New Deal policy received very favorable responses and comments from the global environmental and financial community, such as United Nations Environmental Program and HSBC. The HSBC analyzed that over 80% of Korea's policy package contained green growth component. As you may know, the large portion of New Deal policy in the past has been traditionally spent on pure public works. Korea was the only OECD country that registered the positive growth during the fourth quarter of 2009. To further translate green growth paradigm into policy, we announced a blueprint mapping out the new engines of growth. These include the green technology industry such as renewable energy, low carbon energy, LED applications, green transportation system, advanced water management, and the state-of-the-art green cities. It also included fusion technology, including IT fusion with manufacturing technology such as robot applications, new materials, nano fusion, biomedicine, and value-added food industries. Since the inauguration of the new Park Geun-hye government in February this year, Korea has been putting a great emphasis on the creative economy with social inclusiveness as the most important policy objectives. Whether she will succeed in once again elevating the global economic ranking and status of Korea will be contingent on all Koreans working together to achieve the goals that she has set. However, there are a lot of newly emerging problems that Korea has to solve on the way. First, Korea is rapidly becoming an aging society. The fertility rate has fallen rapidly, limiting the size of the labor force and eventually affecting the domestic demand in the national economy. Second, Korea's saving rate has gone from one of the highest in the world at the time of rapid development to the lowest. For example, about 3% in the case of household saving in 2012. It is the lowest even in the advanced economies, limiting further investment and relying heavily on foreign financial resources. Third, the discrepancy between the largest conglomerates and the small and medium companies has been growing. The largest companies have become more globalized and productive, while the small and medium companies lack entrepreneurial capability and innovation standing in the way of economic progress. Fourth, Korea needs to develop the undeveloped service sector. The high-quality sector needs globalization, but opening of the service sector, such as education, health, hospitals, have been met by the opposition of various domestic interest groups. Fifth, the labor market needs drastic reform, and the labor bureaucracy has to go through revamping. The hostile labor disputes and strikes sap much of Korea's economic potentiality. There are several other challenges that we have to address if Korea were to take off once again and to become truly one of the most advanced economies in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I have put you through a crash course on the recent Korean economy. How could the Korean economy grow so fast during the last half century? What then are the lessons of Korea's fast growth and transformation to other developing economies? I would like to pinpoint a few relevant factors that made Korea grow fast. The first is high-level leadership and vision. Just as the late Sultan was the great visionary for Brunei, one cannot deny that President Park Chung-hee offered a very effective leadership and a great vision for the development of Korea. It was due to him that Korea overcame insurmountable odds to galvanize the nation to aspire to a higher standard of modern living in record time. Undoubtedly, the most successful developing country to have graduated onto the big league of industrial power over the last 30 years. The lesson to take away from Korea's transformative experience is that leadership and vision matter. With a committed, strong, and clean political leadership, armed with an inspiring national vision, huge challenges could be met and daunting vulnerabilities could be mitigated. The second is education and innovation in technologies. UNDP publishes the Human Development Report every year, and this year's report, entitled Human Development Report 2013, The Rise of South, Human Progress in a Diverse World. In the Human Development Index of the report, Korea is ranked 12th in the total of 121 countries. Norway is the first, US the third, Japan the 10th, Brunei the 36th, and China ranked 101st. Education lies at the cornerstone of the remarkable transformation of Korea. Educational performance is vital to economic growth and human development. This is also evidenced in a 2009 OECD assessment, which found that 4 of the 5 highest performing educational systems in the world are Korea, Shanghai in China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Education was crucial in enabling Korea to close the technological gap early in the development path by developing local technical know-how and expertise fostered. The Korean Institute of Science and Technology, established in the early 1960s, was able to attract many foreign educated scientists and engineers back to Korea to help Korea's economic and technological progress. Korea may be one of the very few countries which registered a huge reverse brain drain. Third, early global market access and enlargement also greatly contributed to economic and human progress in Korea. With the fundamentals of a successful market economy firmly established through the export-oriented industrialization strategy of early 1960s through 70s, Korea in the mid-80s had already been transitioned into a market economy fully integrated into the global market. In the early 1990s, top-down reforms for rapid financial liberalization without adequate regulation and supervision of financial system left Korea vulnerable to the external shocks of the Asian financial crisis of 1997-98. Despite this, far-reaching reforms since then in the banking and financial sectors, though not fully satisfactory, and the strengthening of the international framework and corporate governance have rendered the Korean economy more resilient, transparent, and efficient. Proof of this was shown in the Korea's rapid recovery from the initial shock of global financial crisis of 2008 when Lehman Brothers suddenly collapsed. Fourth, while the speed and breadth of Korea's economic transformation are often recognized, the success of Korea's development model lies in its concurrent focus on social inclusiveness. The point is that economic growth is a key to unlocking human potential and development, but it must be accompanied by serious measures to spread income and wealth. For example, 새마을운동, the new community movement launched in Korea in the 70s, sought to rectify the growing difference in income and living standards between the rural areas and the industrializing urban cities. As a result of such conscious effort, Korea has been free of fundamental social exclusion, resulting from large-scale poverty, entrenched income inequalities, unequal access to education, or deep-seated gender discrimination. Korea was a model of fast-growing developing economy with income inequality under tight control. Fifth, good governance is the key to economic success. Clean government is another. The so-called miracle of the Han River and Korea's continued economic and social development would not have been possible without the implementation of well-developed social infrastructure and the emergence of the professional and effective public administration. The ability to translate high-level vision into strategic planning across all levels of governance and the ability to move from policy to action through government guidance and oversight were key elements of the early government-led industrialization. While the first and second five-year plans were being implemented in Korea, no government officials at all levels spared their energy and time, sacrificing even their personal and family lives to the economic prosperity of the nation and to the benefit of the people. Last but not least, the role of the enterprising entrepreneurs has to be added to Korea's economic success. Lee Byung-chul, who founded the Samsung Corporation, global leader now in manufacturing DRAM memory chips, TV, smartphones, and others. Jung Ju-young, who built up Hyundai Group of shipbuilding, automobile, and construction. Park Tae-jun of Pohang Steel, and the founders of LG, GS, SK, among others, are the entrepreneurs who contributed greatly to the Korea's rapid economic development. Therefore, visionary leadership, education and innovation, globalization, social inclusion, good governance and efficient public administration and entrepreneurship. These are some of the lessons that Korea can share with the aspiring developing economies in making their economy a success. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot complete my speech without reference to Brunei. Already the people of Brunei are enjoying one of the highest standards of living in the world, in general, in Asia in particular. Its per capita GNI topped $45,690 in 2012 and is superseded by only Singapore. The recent Human Development Report 2013 by UNDP, which I said, shows that Brunei belongs to the group of the very high human development. There are only 5 Asian countries that belong to this group of 47 countries. This remarkable achievement was made possible through a series of remarkably visionary leadership in Brunei, as I did the late Sultan Omar Ali, Saifuddien, Sadul, Khairi Wajian, provide strong leadership, having helped Brunei and people of Brunei enjoy the independence of the nation as well as economic prosperity. What the late Sultan has taught us is that it is the leader who makes all the difference. Following the late Sultan's leadership, His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah has been offering a very wise leadership, not only to the people of Brunei, but also to the people of the region. He is one of the most respected leaders in the region, and I'm confident that under his stewardship, Brunei will become richer and happier place to live in the coming years. Brunei has just launched Yayasan Brunei, Brunei's National Vision 2035 in 2008. Under the dynamic and experienced leadership of His Royal Highness Prince Haji Al Muhtadi Billah, the Crown Prince, I am sure that Yayasan 2035 will reap the concrete result in acquiring the highly skilled group of educated people in Brunei, in offering a good quality of life for all those in Brunei, and advancing the dynamic and sustainable Brunei economy in the future. I wish you all good health, success, and happiness. Junjun Kasi, Terima Kasih. Thank you for your attention.
We once again invite Associate Professor Dr. Azman bin Ahmad to moderate the question and answer session.
Thank you, His Excellency, for that engaging and inspiring lecture. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, now it is my honor to open to the floor a question and answer session with His Excellency Dr. Han. So please come to the microphone located along the aisle and introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself by giving your name and the institution that you come from before posing your question or comment. And in the interest of time and to allow as many questions as possible to be entertained in this session, we appreciate if you make your questions clear, brief, and concise. Can we have the first question, please?
Good morning, and my name is Alia from Maktab Duli. Louder. My name is Alia from Maktab Duli, and my question is, what is the impact of K-pop to the economy and the learning cultures of the Republic of Korea? Thank you.
The question is, what is the impact of K-pop to the economy of Korea?
Well, I think the effect of K-pop on the Korean economy is not too much because it is still very small size compared to the large scale of Korean economy. But I think through K-pop, Korea is better known among the youngsters in Asia as well as in the world. So in that respect, there are a lot sort of invisible benefit that we reap from K-pop, which we cannot quantify now. But I'm sure that if K-pop goes on and on, it will certainly help Korean economy more than now. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Can we have the next question, please? Yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Your Excellency, I am Lieutenant Colonel Saifuddien Akbar from the Royal Brunei Armed Forces Defense Academy. Thank you for a very enterprising lecture. My question is regarding, now that you have reached the Premier League of richest nations or successful nations, and in accordance with your lecture, I've noticed that you've followed the trailblazing of the other nations like the United States and whatnot. You have reached that Premier League. What sort of advice would you give to Brunei Darussalam if we were to reach that Premier League, so that what actions can we do next if we have reached that Premier League? Thank you.
Lessons for Brunei?
Yes.
Although we have come so far, I don't think Korea is still a genuine advanced economy. As I said, we have many problems that we have to solve in order to become a truly an advanced economy in due course. I don't know how long it will take. We have so-called middle income trap, and although we are not middle income country, this trap is very, very dangerous trap for the country that is moving from the underdeveloped or developing to advanced countries. So we are now at about this. Unlike Brunei, where you have very few population and large resources, natural resources, we are pretty opposite. We have no resources, and we have too many people. So I told the press yesterday that that's why there may be some area of close cooperation between Brunei and Korea in the future, because we could be a complementary economy in that respect.
Thank you, Excellency. Can we have the next question, please?
My name is Nurul Ruhul Soleha. I'm from UBD. My question is, from your Excellency experiences, what should be the key factors that developing economies like Brunei Darussalam should focus now? Thank you.
The question basically asks what is the key factors for Brunei to develop? Based on the experience that you have undergone in Korea, what would be the key factors for Brunei to develop?
Well, I am not an expert on Brunei economy, but as I said, you are resource abundant country, and not many population, but they capacity building in the people, investment in education of the people are very, very important. And this is exactly what I think you are doing. Yesterday I went to the University of Brunei, Darussalam, and found out that you have excellent scholars there teaching the students. So I think apart from the resources, energy sector, if we develop the human resources capacity building, I'm sure that Brunei will be doing even better than now.
Thank you, Excellency. Do you have any question? Yes, please, gentleman over there.
Good morning. I'm Leonard Pang from the University of Brunei Darussalam. My question is, Korea is a successful example of an economy with a good business environment. Can Your Excellency share with us some of the successful factors that have contributed to this? Thank you.
I think in the 60s, we thought that Koreans were not very, we would not be able to produce good business people somehow. And we thought that we are way behind the developed economy in terms of education, particularly in innovations. But during the rapid growth of the economy for the last 50 years, we found out that Koreans are very enterprising people. K-pop is one, and Hallyu is another. So, and also now ICT, information communication technology, in that area we are doing very well. As you may know, Korea's internet penetration is highest in the world. So all in all, while economy is growing, people change. People's attitude toward the business also changes. Therefore, I think this is the lesson that other countries can take. You should not be disappointed, we cannot go ahead. But when you grow faster, and in tune with this growth, people's mind change, people's behavior changes, and also the sort of view of the business also changes.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Can we have the next question from the lady, please?
My name is Dayangku Siti Wafika. I'm from PTE Maragang. My question is, how to transform an economy whose homegrown innovators are based from copy and paste to risk and thought?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Thank you.
How to transform an economy whose homegrown innovators are based from copy and paste to risk and thought?
In the early stage of development, I cannot deny that Korea also copied a lot of intellectual property rights. But as I said, we are the fifth largest economy which has intellectual property rights, has to be protected. Therefore, we have gone over the threshold of trying to protect the intellectual property rights. Now I think many countries in the world, developing countries, are copying patents from other developed economies. But as the economy grows further, you are bound to change. And when you have more international property rights, you move from one side of emulating or copying to the other side of protecting intellectual property rights. So I think as the economy grows over the years, the situation will change from one to the other.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Can we have one more from the gentleman, please?
Okay, sorry. My name is Muhammad Alif Jamal Saleh, law graduate from UNISA. My question is, a few years back I read in the Science magazine which stated that Korea in 2007 or 2009 had tried to create a charter in regards to laws on robotics. My question is, how far had they gone through this effort, and has it reached its completion? Because it's been one of the very interesting field in laws which are to be developed. So, as your capacity as the ex-Prime Minister, I want to know a bit on how far did Korea develop such laws. Thank you.
The law of robotics, do I get it?
I read in 2007 or 2009, I don't remember, but in Science magazine, scientists have written that Korea actually had started to create a charter on laws of robotics based on Asimov 3 laws of robotics.
Would Your Excellency be able to respond to on the laws of robotics that were created about 2007?
Korea had actually initiated this, and many developing countries are actually jumping into this train of creating such laws. So I want to ask Dr. Han, how far is the completion of such charter? Because if such charter do exist now, so the public would like to know.
I think this is one question that I will not be able to answer well, because robotics, I'm not an expert in robotics.
But it's the law of the country.
But what I said in my speech was that when we identify 17 sectors of the high growth in the green growth package, we included robotics. That's fusion between ICT and manufacturing.
Yes, because this year, I read in BBC News, Korea is predicted to have by 2020 to have 1 robot in every household. So
it's quite true that manufacturing, for example, in the automobile industry, the robotics are replacing the manpower tremendously. That's one good example. But there are many other areas like steel industry where they also have, steel companies have robotics, but that's only in the industry, not in the other sectors.
So basically you haven't heard of such charter, the 2007 charter?
Thank you so much for that question. I think we'll give an opportunity to others to question to His Excellency. Thank you for posing the question.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you well, but if you have a question, I can see you after the meeting.
Perhaps can we have one last question, please? Can we have one from the lady who's waiting there? Thank you.
A very good morning. I'm Dr. Hannah from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, University Brunei Darussalam, and a University of York alumni. In your lecture, Your Excellency mentions Koreans' current emphasis on creative economy for social inclusiveness. This ties in neatly with President Park's inauguration speech, where she highlights the cultural renaissance of Korea, a culture that transcends ethnicities and languages. My question for you today is, in your opinion, how has the Korean creative industries or the Korean wave encouraged and forged closer ties amongst countries? Thank you.
Too much resounding voice. I'm sorry, because acoustics. As you know, as I said, that President Bolkiah, when inaugurated, emphasized the need for creative industry, creative economy, and although we have not yet have the result of this policy, we are very keen in promoting this. Creative industry doesn't mean necessarily in designs or so on, but in our behavior, we can change our ideas of daily life. But I think for the creative economy to take a full effect, it will take some time. Although President Park established a special ministry for this purpose, it is still too short for her to have the result from that ministry. But unless we change the current paradigm of growth, she also thinks that we will not be able to grow fast. So that's why her idea of promoting growth in the future through creative economy, meaning entrepreneurship, innovation, state-of-the-art technology. So that's what area she is trying to emphasize.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I would like to end our question and answer session. Once again, on behalf of the Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Foundation, in collaboration with University of Brunei Darussalam, I would like to invite everyone to join me in thanking His Excellency Dr. Seung-soo. Beribu ampun, hamba duli Tuanku seterusnya menjunjung ampun sekiranya terdapat sebarang surut langkah dan tutur kata yang kurang manis dalam hamba duli Tuanku mempengerusikan syarahan pada pagi ini. Wabillahi taufik wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hamba duli Tuanku menjunjung anugerah.
شكرا لكم أميرنا لحضوركم لحفلنا بكم سترقى أمة ترعى كتاب إله